It was Halloween, and the last trick-or-treater had knocked on her door about an hour ago. She locked the storm door, closed the main door, and turned out the single porch light. She went about her business for about another hour. Then there came a small rapping on her storm door. She almost didn't hear it. It was faint and could have easily been mistaken for something else. She switched on the porch light and looked out the little window at the top of the main door. She could not see anyone, so she opened the heavy wooden door. There stood a little man clutching his bowler hat to his chest. He couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, and there was a lifelessness about him. He could have easily been a small statue. He was an older man, and there was something strange about everything about him. He was gray, like a black and white photograph, except for his fingers. They were gray too, but with a hint of green. He looked a bit flat. His old suit was pressed and neat, but it looked like it could have been dusty. The porch light cast a shadow, but she noticed that the shadow didn't make it all the way to the ground, but just sort of faded before it reached the ground. She said with a slight tremble in her voice, May I help you?" The little man looked straight ahead and asked, "Madam, would you like to see what I can do with my long, sticky, green fingers?" "No," she said as she recoiled in horror. I don't." And she shut the heavy wooden door with a thud. She lived alone, and this bothered her, so she made sure that the door was locked, and she went through the house, making sure that all of her windows and doors were locked too. Soon, she was able to forget about the little man, as she dismissed him as a prankster. She climbed the long staircase to her bedroom. She crawled into bed, pulling her downy comforter up to her chin, and she drifted off to sleep. The next evening, as she was locking the house, she double-checked that her storm door was locked before she closed and locked the heavy wooden door. She also went through the house, double-checking all of the doors and windows. Then, at about the same time as the other nights, there came a rapping on the storm door. Though it was faint, there was no mistaking it. It was the same as the night before. Again, she switched on the porch light and peered out of the little window near the top of the door. Again, she could not see anyone, so she cracked open the heavy wooden door, and there he was. The same little man, staring straight ahead and clutching to his chest the same dusty bowler with his greenish, long, old fingers. He was dressed the same as the night before, in an old suit with wide lapels. Tonight, he was a bit more faded, a bit more flat, and his shadow seemed to approach the ground even more than it did the night before. She also noticed that there was a string, a small, thin string, that went from the brim of his bowler hat up to his ear. What do you want?" she asked. The little man again asked, "Madam, do you want to see what I can do with my long, sticky, green fingers?" "No!" she screamed, and she slammed the heavy wooden door. This time, she did not switch off the porch light. Somehow, it made her feel safer. Again, she went through the house, making sure that all of the doors and windows were locked. She tucked herself in bed and fretted over the strange little man. She did not sleep well that night, as visions of the strange, lifelessness little man slipped in and out of her mind's eye. The next evening, at about the same time as the other nights, she heard the faint but unmistakable rapping on her storm door. She crept to the door and looked out of the little window. She had left the light on this evening, as the thought of the return of the little man really bothered her. She wanted to be ready should he return. Again, she could not see anyone at the door. She slowly opened the door, and there he was, clutching his bowler to his chest with both greenish hands, just as he had the other nights. She looked at him, and he was more faded, flatter, and even more black and white than he had been the other nights. The only difference was tonight his shadow made it all the way to the ground, though it was not sharply defined. The shadow on the ground had fuzzy edges, and it seemed to indicate that he was moving from side to side, when in fact he was standing perfectly still, like a lifeless statue. And the string that went from the brim of his bowler up to his ear was quivering. It was then that she realized that this was no string at all. It was a cobweb, a dusty cobweb. It was then that she saw a small spider come out from behind the brim of his hat and ascend the dusty web to his ear. The small spider paused when it reached his left ear. The small hairy spider turned and looked directly into the woman's eyes, as if it was contemplating something sinister. Then the tiny spider scurried into the strange little man's ear. She stooped down and looked directly into the dark eyes of the strange little man, and there she saw it. The hairy little spider passed behind the man's left eye. She could see the spider clearly pass behind the strange little man's left eye, going toward his right side. And then she saw the spider behind the right eye of the strange little man. The spider stopped exactly in the center of the man's eye. It turned and looked directly at her through the lens of the strange little man's right eye. She was staring directly into the right eye of the little man and into the eyes of the spider, all 8 of the eyes of the hairy, scary little spider. The lens of the little man's eye magnified the spider and made it much easier to see all of the little details of the tiny, hairy spider. Then the spider slowly turned and disappeared into the darkness of the little man's mind. The strange little man again asked, "Madam, would you like to see what I can do with my long, sticky, green fingers?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, if you show me what you can do with your long, sticky, green fingers, will you then please just leave me alone?" "Yes, madam," said the strange little man as he stared straight ahead. Darkness seemed to envelop him as he unclutched one hand from the brim of his dusty hat and unfolded his long, sticky green fingers one at a time. He raised his hand before his face. His fingers, no, his entire hand started to glow an eerie green light, a creepy green light that cast upon his face and into the blackness of his eyes. He pressed his long, sticky fingers, his long, sticky green fingers, against his lower lip, and